Project Gold has been going on for over a year now, and it's been an incredibly demanding, creative and technical challenge. A few weeks ago, as we were approaching production, we had some very difficult conversations with the team, and we came to the conclusion that the scope of the project was simply too ambitious for us to execute. Therefore, we decided to move forward with a selection of shots and breakdowns to pay a tribute to what the film could have been. This process will still take several months, and you will be able to follow it in the upcoming production logs. For context, what you're going to see was filmed before this decision was made. You can learn more about this in a blog post on studio.blender.org.
So we are moving forward with layout. We already have 3 sequences done in layout, even some anim blocking done by Pablico. The goal was that we move forward with some sequences so that Andy has material to work on in lighting, because he needs, the real assets, Mikassa, etc. That way, we're going to start briefing animation on those sequences, so that Pablico can start. Rick has gone back to work on the beginning, because the beats were approved, but now they need to be really done in previs.
She goes back into water, basically. It's the moment she's in water.
Yes. I think this is achievable to shot into.
We have a couple of people who will leave the project really soon. Vivian is going to go on some time off, and Julian also. One of the priorities is to make sure that they wrap up what they need to. Julian, it's the sets.
I got multiple tasks left over, much to do. I'm gonna aim for taking off after this week, so I'm gonna speedrun this stuff. I'm gonna try to make everything ready so everyone else can pick up where I left off. Every minute counts.
This file I divided in 2. One's gonna be the post library, and then the other one's gonna be face test. That I'm gonna do some animation on the head for Julian, for Simon. And then they will use it for the cracks and for the texturing. And later I will take the other file that is a post library, and then I will create a post library. But I don't remember how to do it. They change stuff, so I have to relearn the manual. Look, the manual. Everything you need to know about Blender is in here. Manual, blender.org. I will have to ask Andy probably, because I don't know how to read.
We already spent a bit of time on designing the cracks, and we want to animate her in a hard surface way. So each of these little pieces, these shards of her body, her hands, her face, they're supposed to still move and not deform that much, just move and rotate. So this is an experiment where I'm placing curves that via geonodes are dividing the face into shards, and these are then parented to the original deformed mesh. And I'm just experimenting what are the minimum amount of cuts that we need to make this work for various expressions. And this is pretty insightful. It works pretty well. There are always going to be a little bit of intersections over here, but we can get rid of them afterwards, and the animators will also have control over each of these shards if they really want to. But right now I'm just seeing if she's doing a smile, if she's frowning. This is interestingly very similar to where creases would realistically form on the face, and in general muscle movement.
It's a very cool Stormtrooper helmet.
I was a bit worried about the hand and the lower arm, because if you look at how much can move on the hand, it's actually quite a lot of possible deformations. It's quite fleshy, especially the palm. But when you place the cuts, like the minimal needed cuts, it's actually surprising how much you can break it down into into quite big chunks. So I was able to pretty much cut the hands into individual segments. Like the fingers are super simple, But on the palm, it's basically just this area over here that needs to be divided off, and then the thumb volume over here. And then quite a few fractures around the wrist, but only because if you do this, like these rotations, you need to still get a bit of this curvature. So I did fracture it a bit more. And then with the lower arm, it was actually surprisingly simple, because the only deformation this area can do is just like twisting. That's it. So what I did is I placed cuts along the twists on the arm on both the upper and the lower side, and then the pieces can just rotate. And the only thing that needs to be resolved is how those twisting pieces interact with the elbow. So I just cut the elbow out as its own shard, and the twisting pieces are just basically rotating under it. That's basically the minimal solutions that we need to find. How can you sell a motion that you can do with your body with as big pieces as possible, and avoid intersections by just having one shard move under another? On the rest of the body, it's just quite a lot more difficult. If I think back to the shoulder region, I ended up just splitting it into many small pieces because you can do so many motions on the torso that you just need to break it up into smaller pieces.
And Vivian, it's the color script.
Vivian is very good at choosing absolutely insane colors that are very hard to reproduce and render.
I inherited this task from Florent, and by this point some of his work is outdated because of changes in the edit, but also it's kind of tricky because we have a lot of reference points, like a lot of painters that are relevant, but not one of them is like the single one that we are trying to mimic. And I also don't think that with the style that we are exploring, we can mimic any single painter specifically anyway. Since R&D is still going on, it's kind of hard for me to really see the style and predict like the look that we end up with. And that's why it's kind of like, oh, am I going to paint something that we might not even be able to achieve? And yeah, just trying to like see how painterly we go, how impressionistic we go, or if we end up going for stylized realism, more or less, or pretty much realism. It's kind of hard to tell.
That's a great inspiration, and some of the colors I can just pick and use directly, and others I just have to push them a little bit more into something that works with the shading and cycles.
I'm not an oil painter, but I dabble in it, and I think what we are trying to get back to is the looseness and spontaneity, you know, of brushstrokes. It's not like put all the brushstrokes next to each other nicely, right? You need some randomness, you need some energy in there. You want some, you know, bits to be covered less by brushstrokes in a way. You want the canvas to shine through in some bits where appropriate. There's just a lot of techniques that I might have not observed before really looking into it.
The reef, as we call it, is based on cold water reefs. Overall, we're going for a quite murky, mysterious mood. There are these big rock formations that these corals are grown on, and the sun breaks through the waves on the ocean surface. There's this lush vegetation, there's lots of kelp, murk in the water, different types of corals, so it has to look quite lively and vibrant. We witness Mikassa sinking through that layer, and she is not able to stop. That is immediately followed by this colder layer. Those beautiful rock formations, they turn into these really hollowed out skeletal structures. I made this tool where you can sketch out parts of the coral. So the first part, we can generate a base shape and then add some parts manually to it, and you can erase stuff from it and in the end sculpt over the whole thing to make it more look like what we have here. This is the place where she meets the whale for the first time and she's frightened of it, which causes her to swim away and sink even deeper. The base of that is at the foundations of those gigantic rock formations, and those are a little bit more otherworldly. The environment really shifts to something that is more in her imagination. The rocks look more dramatic and more distorted. Once the previs was finalized, Julian actually did a lot of great groundwork in getting the structures of those files together, making sure that all the camera angles line up between all these shots.
In pretty much every movie that we worked on so far, the set creation was somewhat messy. The animators, they're working on the previs to just figure out general shot composition, where the character needs to be, what's happening in the movie. But over the course of the previs process, a lot of story changes happen. Whatever consistency between the scenes used to be there at the beginning is completely mangled. The set is nonsensical because we have these big open underwater sets. It's not like we're doing a sequence out of the Agent 327 movie where we have the barber shop. We have a room that is pretty solid and we can arrange actions based on that. So trying to make that space, this place underwater, make sense out of all of the wildly different camera angles we have is kind of challenging. And there was a very funny thing that happened, that when you try to arrange all of the early sequences where Mikassa is sinking and we had like a travel distance from the top of the ocean surface to the bottom of the ocean is like 69 meters tall. That's like the distance that you can travel in total. Later on in the movie, when she's traveling back up, it's now at 280 meters. All of these problems just trickle down into the set creation and later the animation and then lighting also. And we're just trying to figure out where we can cut corners.
What I've been doing since then is just populating the entire structure with different types of corals. We have the upper side of those gigantic rock formations. They have some seaweed growing on them, some kelp, and also Bo went in and did a great amount of coral variations. Then it's mostly just about scattering everything, respecting the individual shot angles. It's all based on the composition of the shots. We're essentially building it just for the shots, like it's a little tiny diorama.
But then it is a choice that she sails into the sun. I thought there was like debated for a long time that, I don't know, it shouldn't be like her bad choice.